Hey, traveler, you've made it through another day, haven't you? The world outside may still be buzzing, emails to send, people to please, alarms to set, but here, in this quiet little corner of the night, I invite you to step away from all that, to lay your burdens beside the bed like sandals before the threshold, to breathe, just breathe, because where we're going tonight, the past doesn't ask questions. It simply waits, timeless, steam-scented, whisper-soft. Tonight, we are slipping into a world where few men ever walked. A world tiled in terracotta and veiled in steam, where voices were hushed but laughter rang like wind chimes behind marble columns. We are stepping into the Roman women's bathhouse, a place of ritual, of renewal, of rumor, and of rebellion. No, this is not where emperors boasted or where senators sharpened rhetoric. This is not where gladiators washed the blood from their wounds or scribes carried scrolls beneath their cloaks. No, tonight we are not following the usual history. We're not asking who conquered whom or who wrote what decree. Tonight, we drift into a space behind doors that opened only to women, behind walls that heard truths too raw for public amphitheaters. In this intimate, humid cocoon where bodies were bared and secrets steamed from skin, we listen not to generals, but to grandmothers. Not to emperors, but to exhausted mothers. Not to lawgivers, but to laundresses with red, cracked hands. This, my dear insomniac, is the story that statues don't tell. Now, before you turn off the lamp, before you surrender to the weight of your pillow, come with me. Let the clicking of history's heels grow distant. Let the marble fade. Let the moon find your face. We're not reading from scrolls tonight. We're inhaling stories like vapor from warm water, stories that curl through time like strands of wet hair. You see, when we imagine ancient Rome, we often picture columns, triumphs, blood, discipline, war. But do we ever ask where the women went when they needed to disappear? When they wanted to feel clean, not just on the surface, but all the way through? When the weight of surviving a Roman day pressed against their chests so heavily, they had to steam it out before morning? They went here, to the caldarium, the tepidarium, the frigidarium. But those words sound clinical, don't they? Let me tell you what they meant to her. The caldarium was not just a hot bath. It was a return to herself. The tepidarium was not just a warm pause. It was a soft sigh between burdens. And the frigidarium? That icy jolt wasn't just for tightening pores. It was for remembering she was alive. She who sold olives at dawn, cleaned floors at noon, nursed children through fevers in the dark, came here to stop being everything to everyone for just an hour. To peel off her tunic, her name, her titles, her responsibilities, and melt into a place where the body stopped performing and simply existed. Let the candlelight flicker low in your mind. Can you smell it yet? The oil? The smoke? The damp mineral walls? Step barefoot with me across the mosaic tiles. You may notice the cracks. They're not flaws. They're the memory of footsteps, of souls that walked before ours. They remember the woman with the uneven gait from carrying urns every day, the girl who limped after childbirth, the elder who shuffled with dignity. These bathhouses were not built for perfection. They were built for presence. And presence, real, full, undistracted presence, is what we rarely allow ourselves anymore, isn't it? Back then, for Roman women, this was a daily pilgrimage. Not every woman, mind you. Only those with the coin, or the connections, or the cunning to slip past the gates. But once inside, even a slave girl might find momentary reprieve. Even a senator's wife might feel ordinary. Status dissolved here, in this steamy egalitarian dream. It wasn't always fair. It wasn't always safe. But it was different. It was theirs. Do you hear it now? The gentle splash of water over stone? The murmur of voices drifting like mist? Some were gossiping about neighbors, others complaining about in-laws, and a few, the brave few whispered dreams. dreams of escape, of literacy, of owning something, anything, for once in their lives. And yes, there were rituals. Not religious ones, though some prayed. These were feminine rites of renewal. Scrubbing, oiling, braiding hair, massaging muscles, peering at their own reflection in copper mirrors with the kind of curiosity that dared to hope. What if I were more than just someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's mother? They didn't speak these questions aloud, of course, but the walls heard them, the tiles felt them. And tonight, so will we. So lie back, let your limbs grow heavy. Let your mind float like olive oil over water. The world of the Roman women's bathhouse awaits. Its steam rises still, curling through the ruins, whispering stories never written in marble. Stories of softness, survival, strength, and the unbearable beauty of being unseen. No men allowed, remember? Not then, and not now. But you get to listen. You get to watch. You get to understand, if only in the quiet. And maybe, just maybe, you'll never look at history the same way again. They always arrived with something invisible pressed against their skin, something heavier than tunics or cloaks. It wasn't dirt, though that too came layered in like the dust of the forum on a summer afternoon. No, what they carried was weariness. Not the loud kind, not the gasping exhaustion of soldiers or the dramatic sighs of poets. This was the quiet ache of women who bore the day without applause. The doors to the bathhouse never creaked. They swung open like secrets, unannounced but not unwelcome. And there, just beyond, was the first threshold, not architectural, but emotional. A kind of soft surrender. It began the moment a woman stepped from the stone street into the atrium, where the temperature shifted and the scent of warm olive oil met her nose like a kiss from someone who remembered her name. She didn't speak when she entered. Not at first. Silence was the first offering, her voice held in the back of her throat like a coin waiting to be spent. The bathhouse did not demand words. It invited presence. And so she would pause, just briefly, in that dimmed light, allowing the air to touch her before any other soul did. The slaves knew not to rush her. They'd learned that even the most harried woman needed that small moment of stillness, that beat of arrival. The attendants moved like shadows barefoot, unobtrusive, their arms laden with folded linens and tiny pots of perfumed paste, their eyes always lowered, but their minds sharp. They saw everything, every new scar, every limp more pronounced than the week before, every necklace missing, replaced by red impressions in the skin where gold used to lie. She would walk past the entry chamber, her soles brushing ancient mosaic geometric swirls and faded nymphs dancing underfoot. Each tessera a memory, each line of grout like a path carved from the ordinary to the sacred. And as the warmth began to wrap around her like a second skin, the outer world would start to flake away, shedding from her thoughts like so much dried clay. In the appetiterium, she would disrobe. But this was not stripping, not really. It was unlayering, not just of fabric, but of performance. Off came the role of the dutiful daughter, the accommodating wife, the ever-giving mother. Off came the caution, the measured words, the stitched lips. What remained beneath was not bare, but honest. She was not exposed here. She was revealed. Other women surrounded her, young and old, wrinkled and smooth, loud and silent. And yet, no one stared. Because no one was really looking at flesh. They were looking for signs. Was she grieving? Had she bled recently? Had she lost weight from hunger, or from mourning, or perhaps from too many whispered prayers unanswered? The air was thick, not with judgment, but with remembrance. Here, in this space where warm mist softened everything sharp, women didn't compare. They communed. They didn't envy. They noticed. They didn't compete. They coexisted. And the sounds? Oh, the sounds. Not the clamor of male bathhouses, those ego-fueled echo chambers of laughter and boasts, but something subtler. The drip of condensation from a marble arch. The hush of cloth pulled gently from a shoulder. The sighs that escaped not from pain, but from its release. There were whispers too, yes, but they weren't malicious. They were the sound of women piecing together the tapestry of their lives, one thread of gossip, grief, or joy at a time. Sometimes in that very room, a woman would weep, quietly, not always dramatically, not always with explanation. The others wouldn't ask. They didn't need to. They would offer space, sometimes a touch, rarely advice. They understood that here, among steam and stone, a tear could be more cleansing than any oil. There was one corner of the appetiterium where the walls curved inward like cupped hands. That's where the eldest women sat. They didn't undress quickly. They took their time. Their hands bore the map of years, veins like blue roads, knuckles swollen like milestones. But when they finally stepped into the steam, they did so with a grace no youth could counterfeit. They had nothing left to prove. They had already carried the weight of children who didn't survive winters, husbands who vanished into campaigns, gods who answered with silence. Sometimes, the younger women watched them and wondered not aloud, but internally, what it might feel like to be that unhurried, that unconcerned with symmetry or tone or fashion, to simply be. And then came the moment. The one every woman knew in her bones. The step from the appetiterium into the tepidarium. That threshold was not physical. It was spiritual. The warmth of that room met her not just with temperature, but with memory. It reminded her of the womb, of safety, of a time before men asked her to be anything but herself. She would pause again, just briefly, letting the air kiss her skin. The light was lower here, filtered through tiny holes in the vaulted ceiling. It painted the room in constellations, as if the gods themselves watched quietly from above. And maybe they did. Maybe Venus held her breath each time a woman exhaled the truth in this room. Maybe Vesta smiled when mothers found quiet. Maybe Juno herself once sat on these benches, her divine dignity softened by the scent of jasmine and myrrh. She would lower herself onto the bench, stone warmed by countless bodies before hers, and let her muscles unclench. She didn't speak right away. Speech required energy, thought. Here, in this sacred stillness, she allowed herself the gift of wordlessness, the gift of simply being. And as her breath deepened, as her pores began to open like flowers greeting morning, she felt something shift inside her. Not dramatically, not all at once, but like a knot untangling in a thread too long ignored. Perhaps a friend would join her then, sitting close enough to feel the shared warmth, but not so close as to intrude. They might speak of bread prices, of pregnancies, of dreams. Or they might not speak at all, letting the silence cradle them like the arms of an old nursemaid. And then, softly, the attendants would come, with oil, with pumice stones, with practiced hands that never lingered, but always listened. The exfoliation wasn't just for skin. It was for stories. As the dead cells fell away, so did the layers of stoicism, of restraint. Women told things here they never told anyone, not even themselves. I was afraid when he touched me last night. I don't think I love him anymore. I wish I'd never had children. I want to run away. And the attendants said nothing. They just scrubbed it, gently, firmly, until the skin shone again, and the woman felt, not new, but remembered. In this place, sweat was not shameful. It was sacred. It meant she had entered the inner process of rebirth. She was dissolving, just a little, into something softer, truer, less polished for public consumption, and more prepared for private truth. But not every woman melted easily. Some sat rigid, their backs never quite touching the wall, their eyes darting, their lips too tightly pressed. You could always tell the ones who feared stillness, who weren't ready to be seen, not by others, but by themselves. And yet, Even they stayed. Even they returned. Because somewhere beneath their armor of anxiety, they knew. This place, this bathhouse, was not just architecture. It was alchemy. It turned weariness into wisdom, duty into dignity, and routine into ritual. The Tepidarium held them all. The young with hopes too large for their frames. The middle-aged with responsibilities etched into their spines. The old with silence as their only companion. It didn't ask for change. It offered the conditions in which change could occur. And when the time felt right, not by the clock, but by the soul, each woman would rise. Not abruptly, not with haste, but with a kind of liquid deliberateness, like a thought being formed. And she would walk slowly, always slowly toward the Caldarium. But that room is not yet ours to enter. Not tonight. Not until we've fully arrived here, in this liminal warmth. Not until the echoes of our own distractions have dimmed, and we are ready to let go not just of the day, but of who we think we have to be. So breathe with me now, deep, steady. Let the warmth settle into your bones. Let the whispers of those women wrap around your ears like lullabies in a forgotten tongue. And ask yourself quietly, gently, when was the last time you were in a room where no one expected anything from you? Because that, dear listener, is the rarest luxury of all. And it waits, just beyond the steam. There is a sound that lives only in the Caldarium. You don't hear it when you first enter. It takes a moment after the heat wraps around your skin, like a second invisible body, after your breath adjusts to the thickness of the air, after your eyes yield to the blur of steam, and then it arrives. That low, persistent drip, water sliding from stone, dropping into shallow basins, into cracks, into time itself. The sound of the room exhaling, not with relief, but with memory. The Caldarium did not blaze. It wasn't fire. It was glow. Heat soaked into the bones of the building, radiating out from walls and floors and benches, like a heartbeat too slow to frighten, but too constant to ignore. Every stone was warm, as if the room had been waiting all day for you, and perhaps it had. Perhaps the room knew which women would walk through its door before they ever rose from sleep. Perhaps it dreamed of their feet, of their sorrows, of their sweat. Here, the air was so thick you could almost drink it. It clung to eyelashes, to collarbones, to the very edge of breath. Conversation softened here, not because it was forbidden, but because it was unnecessary. Words were slower, more chosen. In this room, women did not waste syllables. They let their bodies speak first. The Caldarium did not demand anything. It did not require performance. It only offered one question, unspoken yet thunderous. What are you ready to let go of? Some women came ready to weep. Others came pretending they would not. But even the proudest, the strongest, the ones who swore they would never fall apart in front of strangers, found themselves undone, not by judgment, but by permission. There was something about the way the heat lifted from the tiles and soaked into the gut that uncoiled all the knots tied by silent years. A kind of thermal honesty. A woman would sit in the corner, her knees drawn up, her hands limp in her lap, her gaze blurred by sweat. And she would begin to remember not with her mind, but with her body. That night, 10 years ago, when the child didn't cry. That morning, when her husband's silence said more than his fists ever did. That afternoon, when she realized she would never be her mother. That evening when she looked into the mirror and no longer recognized her own name. No one interrupted her remembering. No one tried to fix her. That was not the function of the Caldarium. This was not a room for answers. It was a room for release. Women exhaled things here they didn't know they had been holding. Guilt, rage, lust, longing. Sometimes they did so in silence, sometimes in sobs, sometimes in quiet laughter that sounded almost like prayer. And then between these unburdenings came the rituals. They were never ceremonial in the way temples required. but they were sacred. A woman would coat herself in oil, sometimes rose, sometimes lavender, sometimes nothing scented at all, just the raw, slick echo of the earth, and she would scrub, not as a task, not as punishment, as offering, as reclamation. She would scrub her arms, her thighs, her chest, her stomach, not to become beautiful, but to remember she already was, under all the dust, all the errands, all the expectations. She was not cleansing herself for anyone else, not for a husband, not for the gods, not for the marketplace. She was doing it because it was the only moment all day when her hands were allowed to touch her body with kindness. The oil mixed with sweat, and both ran down her skin like ink, writing a story that had no words but many truths. The hot air carried the scent upwards, into the walls, into the arches, into the breath of the other women who shared the room. And somehow, in this shared soup of heat and honesty, no one felt alone. Sometimes, a younger woman would approach an older one, not boldly, not nervously, but with the curiosity of someone desperate for a compass. And she would ask, "How did you survive it?" Not specifying what it was, because it could mean anything. A death, a betrayal, a long, slow erosion of the self. And the older woman, who had long stopped trying to pretend that pain was a private affair, would answer, not with advice, with stories, with memory, with presence. The younger one would listen, eyes wide, oil dripping from her temples, learning not just what to do, but how to be. There were, of course, unspoken rules. A woman never revealed what another had whispered in this room. A woman never mocked another's tears. A woman never, under any circumstances, turned her gaze away when someone needed to be seen. The bathhouse had its own ethics, older than any emperor. They were not laws. They were trusts. And yes, there was laughter too. The kind that comes when grief has been fully acknowledged. Laughter that tastes like smoke and honey. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't cynical. It was round, full, generous. It rose from the benches like steam, curling around the ankles of the weeping and reminding them, you are not your wound. You are not your loss. You are still here. Children were rarely allowed in the caldarium. This was not their place. But every now and then, a newborn might be brought in, wrapped in linen, pressed against a mother's bare chest. The infant would squirm, blink, cry, then always fall asleep, because the womb recognized the heat, the heartbeat, the hush. Because here, the world returned to its beginnings. And in that same moment, a crone might be sitting nearby, eyes milky, skin folded, legs veined like river maps. She would glance at the child, then not smile, but nod, as if acknowledging a truth too large for words. We come in heat, and we return to it. Life begins in warmth, and perhaps it ends in the same. Sometimes, a woman would walk into the caldarium, wearing nothing but defiance. You could see it in the tilt of her head, in the way she lowered herself to the bench, as though claiming territory. She was angry. Not always at someone. Sometimes at the world. Sometimes at time. Sometimes at herself. And she would sit there, boiling, not just from the room, but from within, until something softened, until her jaw unclenched, until her body began to weep without tears. And then she, too, would reach for oil. There was a shelf in the corner, never cleaned by the slaves, always dusty, where women left behind tokens. A broken comb, a wilted flower, a scrap of ribbon, nothing valuable, everything sacred. These were not offerings to the gods. These were offerings to each other. Reminders that someone had once come here, suffered here, healed here, and left a part of herself as proof. As promise, the shelf never emptied. The caldarium was never just about sweat. It was about surrender, not to others, to self. It was the moment a woman stopped fighting her reflection. The moment she stopped needing to be brave. The moment she allowed softness to mean strength. And when she rose slowly, always slowly, her skin glowed not from heat alone, but from having been allowed to exist without demand. Her footsteps echoed differently now. Not heavier, not lighter, just truer. She had not been fixed. She had not been changed. She had simply been seen. As she left the room, she never looked back. The caldarium was not a place to linger. It was a place to pass through, like fire in a ritual. You entered carrying the weight of what you could no longer bear. You exited carrying only your name. Some forgot that name in the outside world. Some let it be rewritten by fathers, by husbands, by society. But in here, in this steam-draped sanctuary, their names were intact, whole, even if unspoken, even if unknown to anyone but the walls. You see, history rarely wrote about this room. It was too quiet, too intimate, too ordinary. But I would argue softly, tenderly, unshakingly, that this room preserved more of Rome than any statue or inscription. Because in here, women remembered how to be alive. And perhaps that is the only survival that matters. She does not walk quickly. No one does after the caldarium. There is something almost ceremonial in the way her steps slow, as if her body has remembered the weight of her own gravity. Heat has softened the sinew, uncoiled the muscles, made her pulse more honest. But now, as she moves through the archway draped with thick mist into the cooler corridor, her skin begins to feel the air again. Not as threat, as invitation. The frigidarium waits. And unlike the warm rooms before, it does not seduce. It confronts. There is no music here. No gentle breath of scented oil. No low echo of whispers softened by steam. What lives here is clarity, the kind that makes no apology. The kind that wakes without warning. The kind that does not coddle. And she knows this. Every woman knows this, which is why she always pauses before stepping in. She may be naked, but it is not her body that hesitates. It is something deeper. That quiet voice inside that asks, am I ready to feel again without the haze? Am I ready for truth without warmth? The frigidarium is not cruel, but it is honest. It reminds her that life does not always hold its hand gently. It reminds her that clarity does not always arrive with kindness. It is the mirror that does not blare. The mirror that shows not what she wishes, but what is. She steps forward. The water is still. No ripples. No motion. It has the kind of stillness that belongs to old temples and deep wells, and moments before someone says, I don't love you anymore. The kind of stillness that humbles, not by punishment, by presence. Her toes touch first. And it's not pain. It's not shock. It's memory. The kind stored in the skin, not the mind. Memory of cold mornings in the countryside. Of winter nights holding a feverish child close to her chest. Of loneliness. Of starting over. Of drawing breath even when she didn't want to. Then the ankles. The knees. And with each inch descended, she does not shrink. She remembers. Cold is not the absence of heat. It is the presence of something else entirely. Something sharp. Something sacred. It awakens. It reveals. The water wraps around her waist, and she lets out a sound, not a gasp, not a shriek. A sigh. A sound that belongs neither to comfort nor discomfort, but to recognition. She has met this feeling before. And though she would not choose it in the marketplace, she honors it here. Because in this bath, she is not expected to pretend. Then she lowers herself fully. The water embraces her like a hard truth, unyielding but essential. And the silence is different now. It is not the silence of sorrow. It is the silence of survival. She sits still, very still. The cold creeps in, not just to the surface, but deeper. To the bones, to the places where names are carried. To the places where she keeps the things she cannot say aloud. This is the moment that scares most. Not because of temperature, But because of transparency, here there is nowhere to hide. She feels it, her thoughts crystallizing, no longer muddled by heat, by comfort, by ritual. Here, everything sharpens. Her grief, yes, her rage, her regret, but also her knowing, her strength, her decision. Sometimes a woman arrives at the frigidarium, still tangled in another story. A lover's abandonment, a father's silence, a city's expectations. But in this cold, those threads unravel. Slowly, not by force, but by contrast. She begins to see what is hers, and what is not, what she has carried, and what she may finally put down. And she breathes, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The cold no longer stings. It steadies. It claims the parts of her that need no decoration, no apology, no explanation. The other women are quiet too, not because they fear breaking the silence, but because they respect it. No one talks over clarity. No one shouts over revelation. In this room, words would sound too loud, so they let the water speak. They let the breath become scripture. One woman sits with her eyes closed, hands open on the stone ledge. Her fingers twitch slightly, as if recalling a song from her childhood. Another stares forward, unblinking, like she's watching the future unfold across the tiled wall. A third dips under, fully submerged, and when she surfaces, her face does not smile. But it glows not from warmth, but from resolve. And there, in the corner, sits a woman whose scars are not on her skin. You can see it in her posture. Upright, contained. A survivor of something no one asks about, because they know asking would only reopen what took years to scar. She is not here to be pitied. She is here to remember she is more than what was done to her. And the cold does not flinch from her. It holds her with a strength that says, I see all of you, and I do not look away. This room is not an ending. It is an edge. The edge of emotion, of awareness, of rebirth. The final stage before re-entry into the world. The last veil to pass through before putting the tunic back on, stepping into sandals, becoming someone again. But in this space, time stretches. There is no rush. The body knows when to leave. And when it does not leap. It rises. Dripping, quiet, whole. The women wrap in linen, their skins flushed from fire, then rinsed in ice. And though no words are exchanged, something has changed. Not on the outside, on the inside, where truth now lives with less fear. Some pause before exiting. They look back not at the room, but at the version of themselves that sat here just minutes ago. And they nod, as if saying, thank you for surviving long enough to get here. The attendant waits silently at the door, eyes down, arms full of folded cloth. She has seen hundreds walk this path. She knows not all will return, but many will. Because this is the only place some women remember how to be their own. And as the door opens, and the cooler hallway breathes across her damp skin, she steps out, not into a better life, not into a fixed life, but into the only life she has, carrying herself differently now, not straighter, but deeper, as if every step touches ground in a way it never did before. And though she will dress again, though she will pick up her basket, though she will hear voices calling her name and asking for things, coins, care, obedience, something in her will resist disappearing. Because once you have met yourself in the frigidarium, once you have sat with your naked truth without running, once you have allowed silence to speak louder than approval, you never return unchanged. And even if no one notices, you do. The body does not move quickly after cold. It learns again, slowly, how to return to warmth. Not the fierce kind of the caldarium, but a gentler hush, a hush found only in the drawing room, where breath settles and limbs remember their weight, where everything begins to quiet before the world is allowed back in. The Roman women called it the laconicum, or sometimes simply the quiet place. But names are slippery things. What mattered was the feeling, the way the air no longer challenged her, but received her. As though the walls had been listening the entire time she moved through steam and fire and chill, and now they were ready to catch what remained. Not to keep, just to witness. She enters with water still clinging to her skin in rivulets that trace her collarbone like the memory of a river. Her hair, wet and heavy, clings to her neck as if afraid to let go. Her hands, no longer trembling from the cold, now move with a grace that is not performative, but earned. She does not seek attention. She seeks continuation. This room is not an afterthought. It is the coda to the symphony, the final breath in the lungs before speaking her name again. There are benches here, lower to the ground, wide enough to invite proximity, but humble enough to refuse spectacle. The light is different, too, filtered through thin linen curtains high above, softened into gold. Dust moves slowly in those beams, as if dancing in reverence for the stories that still float in the air. Women sit here, wrapped in cloth. Not draped, not posed, wrapped, as in sheltered, as in cleaned. The linen carries heat from the stone, and the oil from the skin. It smells faintly of rosemary and sandalwood, and long-forgotten lullabies. Here, posture softens. Here, backs do not carry the weight of roles, only rest. And then comes the brushing. It sounds small, doesn't it? A comb drawn through wet strands. But this was no mere grooming. It was resurrection. A woman did not comb her own hair. Not here. Another woman did it for her. A friend. A stranger. An elder. A child. There were no rules, only the moment. The slow, steady pull of bone or bronze, or carved olive wood, through tangled black, brown, gold, gray. The brush did not judge the knots. It listened to them. It moved through them not to force, but to understand. And as it moved, stories emerged, not told with fanfare, not performed. Simply spoken, as though the voice itself had been waiting beneath the scalp, needing only the rhythm of the brush to coax it free. He hasn't looked me in the eye since last harvest. I miss the way my daughter used to laugh before the fever took her. I don't know if I believe in anything anymore. No one flinched. No one offered platitudes. The brush moved. The hand held steady. The silence that followed was not empty. It was sacred. In this room, women learned how to be held without being asked for anything in return. And that, perhaps more than any balm or bath, was the healing. Sometimes someone would sing, low, barely more than a hum, a folk song, a prayer disguised as melody, a half-remembered tune their grandmother used to hum while shelling beans. The sound would drift through the space like smoke, curling into the ears of the others, waking something that had been sleeping far too long. There were no mirrors here, no reflections, because nothing needed confirmation. She did not have to see herself to know she existed. She felt it in the weight of the cloth on her shoulder, in the way the brush cradled her scalp, and the sound of her own voice not being interrupted. Even the attendants moved differently in this room. Not as servants, as stewards. They did not scrub or wash. They carried towels, refilled bowls, lit candles, tended not to the body, but to the space. They did so without intrusion. Their movements barely stirred the air. And yet, somehow, you always felt their presence, like a hand hovering near your back, not touching, but promising to catch if needed. A woman might fall asleep here, mid-sentence, her hair still damp, her breath slowing. No one would wake her. This was not a place where time was punished. It was a place where time was forgiven. Others whispered plans, not grand ones, small rebellions. Buying different grain. Saying no to someone who always expected yes. Writing a letter to a sister long ignored. Planting basil in a corner of the courtyard. Smiling without permission. Each plan held the gravity of a revolution, though none would be recorded in scrolls. But the bathhouse would remember. The walls would store those intentions in the stain-marked corners, holding them until the woman was ready to carry them out. And there were women who said nothing, who sat with eyes closed, breathing like monks. You could tell they had shed something in the caldarium and washed it away in the frigidarium. And now, in this room, they were deciding what would grow in the space that remained. Not all decisions came gently. Some women trembled, not from fear, from recognition. Because when you finally realize what you no longer have to carry, your hands forget what to do with freedom. And still, the brush moved. It moved through curls and coils and straight lines like a river through stone. It moved with patience, with rhythm, with remembrance. And as it moved, so did the woman back into herself, slowly, deliberately, without announcement. There were times, rare but real, when a woman wept while being brushed. Not from sorrow, from softness. Because she had not been touched with care in so long, she had forgotten how it felt. Because being tended to without expectation felt more radical than love. Because the comb through her hair said what no one else had dared to speak. You do not have to earn tenderness. And in this silence, in this golden, quiet cradle of a room, she believed it, even if only for a moment. Some women did not speak at all. They left behind only a lock of hair tied with thread, set in a corner bowl, no note attached. It was not mourning. It was marking. A way of saying, I was here. I softened here. I lived. The others would see the hair and nod. No one asked why. No one took it. It was not for possession. It was a shrine of presence. Time thinned in this room. The sun did not move. Or if it did, no one noticed. What mattered was the exhale, the final unclenching, the last unraveling before the world would call her name again. And eventually, gently, always gently, the brushing stopped. The cloth was tightened around her shoulders. A hand, light as breath, touched her back. No push, just awareness. And she rose. Not as a transformation, not as a climax, but as a continuation. Her body did not glow. Her eyes did not blaze. She was not new. She was herself. And that was enough. As she stepped out, her feet touched the mosaic floor with the confidence of someone who had found her own rhythm again. Not louder, not lighter, just true. She did not look behind. The quiet room did not ask for farewells. It only gave beginnings. And somewhere in the corner, the brush was placed back into its bowl, damp with stories, bristled with memory, waiting, because another woman would come. And she, too, would need her hair combed. And she, too, would leave behind something only the bathhouse would know how to keep. There is a particular kind of silence that greets a woman when she steps back into the outer world after having passed through water and fire and breath. It's not the silence of peace. It's the silence of re-entry. A silence thick with the weight of voices waiting to reclaim her. But for a moment, for one sweet, staggering moment, she is not quite theirs yet. The archway of the bathhouse frames her like a painting. And beyond it, Rome stretches again, its voices sharper, its stones harder, its expectations immediate. But she stands still, not because she fears what waits, but because something inside her refuses to rush. Her sandals rest beneath her feet, but she has not slipped them on yet. Her toes press softly into the warm stone, as if to remember what it feels like to stand grounded in her own being. Behind her, the baths whisper their last breath into her skin, the oil still clinging gently to her arms, her collarbone, the nape of her neck. She carries the scent of rosemary and secrets. She carries the feel of hands that asked for nothing. She carries the hush of rooms that required only truth. And though none of it is visible, it is all there woven into the way her shoulders hang, into the calm in her gaze, into the quiet steadiness of her breath. The street outside does not wait for her to decide who she is now. It continues, loud and indifferent. Merchants shout, Children chase pigeons, carts rattle, and somewhere a man is explaining loudly why the gods are displeased with this year's grain. But she is not yet in that rhythm. Her body still moves to the cadence of steam and slow brushing. Her ears still ring with the sound of water lapping against stone, and a woman whispering, "You don't have to carry it anymore." She picks up her basket again. It's lighter now, not because anything was taken out, but because she no longer believes she must fill it with everything others expect. The linen tucked inside, folded with the precision of a woman who knows how to honor her tools, still smells faintly of heat. She runs her hand across the edge of the woven rim, anchoring herself, and then she walks, not the way she came. Something in her refuses repetition. She takes the longer path, past the fig cellar with too many flies, past the well where the gossip dries faster than laundry, past the alleyway where two children pretend they read gladiators and no one bothers to tell them that real violence doesn't to wait for armor. She walks not to get somewhere, but to let her steps remember the world slowly, to let her new silence stretch its legs. Eyes follow her, though they pretend not to. Not because she's beautiful in a way that asks for comment, but because there's something about her that unsettles the pace of others, something unhurried, something unbending, something freshly named. Even the dogs seem to notice, pausing in their scavenging to glance at her, ears twitching as if catching a scent they can't place. She does not offer a smile, not because she lacks warmth, but because she has learned that smiling is not always kindness. Sometimes silence is the deeper gift, a refusal to perform, a decision to exist, unpolished, unoffered, undeniable. She passes by a young man arguing with his mother in the doorway of their home. The woman's voice is sharp, tight with exhaustion, while the boy's is louder than he means it to be. A few months ago, she might have winced, quickened her pace, tried to vanish behind the sound. But now she walks past them, with the steadiness of someone who has sat in silence longer than either of them has known how to speak. She sees not the fight, but the ache beneath it, the wanting, the confusion, the heat still clinging to unspoken tenderness. And so she simply walks. At the corner, a child stumbles into her path barefoot, cheeks flushed, holding a crust of bread too big for his hands. He blinks up at her with wide, dusty eyes. For a moment, neither of them says anything. And then, gently, she lifts the edge of her linen and wipes a smudge of olive oil from his chin. He doesn't flinch. Children recognize women who have softened without breaking. He mumbles a thanks and runs off. She doesn't watch him go. She knows some things are not meant to be followed. When she reaches the market square, the noise thickens again. Smells crowd each other for space vinegar, sweat, ripe fruit, tired meat. Voices swell like waves against the temple walls. And yet she does not flinch. The woman who has walked through the frigidarium does not fear clamor. She listens differently now. She hears not only what is said, but what is avoided. She moves through the square as if through fog touched but untouched. A vendor calls to her, waving figs. She nods but does not stop. Another offers fabric. She glances at the dye and knows it will fade too quickly. She does not waste her coin. A friend half forgotten, half feared appears with questions in her eyes. The woman answers them all with a look that says, "I know who I was yesterday, but today I've remembered something else." And that answer, silent as it is, shifts something in the other woman. Not enough to follow, but enough to wonder. She doesn't go home right away. Instead, she turns toward the edge of the neighborhood, where the aqueduct shadows stretch long and quiet, and no one is shouting. She walks along the wall, letting the rough stone brush her fingertips. The sun is starting to lower now, staining the tiles with that soft amber that only appears when the world forgets to be harsh for a while. She thinks about her mother, not in sorrow, not in regret, just in weight, in inheritance. In the way women pass down silence, the way others pass down recipes. She wonders what her mother would have said if she had sat in the caldarium. If someone had combed her hair slowly. If someone had asked her, "When was the last time you were truly seen?" She suspects her mother would have laughed. Or wept, or both. The wind shifts. A bird cuts across the sky with no audience. She stops walking and looks up not to chase meaning, but to remember her own smallness, her own rootedness. She places a hand on her belly, not because she is pregnant, but because this is where the world has always lived inside her, whether in grief or growth or fire. She closes her eyes just for a moment and listens not to the city, not to the gods, but to herself. And in that moment, she does not need anyone to approve. She begins to walk again, this time with a rhythm that no longer needs the bathhouse to remind her who she is. She carries it now. Inside her, the steam, the silence, the calm, the cold. A man passes by, looks her over, opens his mouth to speak, then thinks better of it. Something in her presence reshapes the air around her. He turns away. She does not smile. She does not thank him. She does not need to. She turns the corner and sees her home. It looks the same. The same cracked lintel. The same vine climbing where it shouldn't. The same noise spilling from inside. A child laughing too loud. A pot clanging. Someone arguing over something that won't matter tomorrow. But she steps closer with new feet. She reaches the door with new breath. And before she lifts the latch, she pauses not to prepare, not to steel herself, but to mark the crossing. She is not leaving peace behind. She is bringing it in. And whatever waits inside will find her not empty, but whole. Because she did not go to the bathhouse to escape her life. She went to remember she had one. The bathhouse breathes, even when no one is watching. It does not need footsteps to feel alive. It does not need voices to remember what was said. It remembers because it was made to hold. Heat, moisture, secrets, and time. No empire forgets the sound of women shedding silence. Especially not this one. By morning, the attendants arrive first. Before the city has shaken the dew off its rooftops. Before the forum stirs with schemes and senate sandals. Before the bakers finish blessing their ovens. The slaves with cloth-bound feet open the doors not with reverence, but with routine. They light the fires. They sweep the ashes. They check the channels that bring in the water from the aqueduct, watching for pressure, for leaks, for the way the stone groans slightly when it knows another day is coming. They do not speak much, not out of fear, but because they know the walls are still sleeping. And you do not disturb something that has spent the night digesting truth. If you stood very still in the atrium alone, before the voices returned, you might feel it. That soft hum beneath the soles of your feet. A low mineral memory vibrating up through the cracks between tiles. Not a sound, but a presence. As if something older than Rome, older than names, was stirring. The walls remember every name never spoken aloud. Every hand that trembled before letting go. Every laugh that covered a bruise. Every child lost between months. Every affair that never dared speak its own desire. They do not distinguish between sinner and saint. They remember everything equally, because they were never asked to judge, only to hold. Stone is not as cold as people think, especially stone that has listened. Some nights, after the last woman leaves and the last bucket has been poured, a hush settles into the corners with such density it could crush a lesser structure. But the bathhouse is not collapse. It absorbs. It always has. It does not sigh or echo or cry. It endures. There were nights long ago when a woman would sneak back in after dark, not for ritual, not for bathing, but because she had nowhere else to go. She would press herself against the wall of the tepidarum, not to feel warmth, but to feel remembered. Her hair damp from tears, not steam, her breath tight. Her body curled as small as it could make itself without vanishing. She left before dawn, always. But the stone did not forget her. It carries her shape still. Some of the carvings in the upper arches are not decorative. They are messages, not for gods, for each other, scratched lightly with fingernails, with hairpins, with broken tiles, names, fragments, codes only the women understood. I am still here. I made it. He didn't win. The officials never noticed. Or if they did, they pretended not to. Once, a woman left a strip of red thread tucked behind a brick in the amphitheatrium. It wasn't seen until months later, when the wall was repaired after a minor earthquake. No one knew what it meant. But the woman who found it wept without knowing why. The bathhouse did not care what gods the women prayed to. It did not care who they voted for in the marketplace. It did not care if they were born noble or bought with coin. It treated each arrival as a return, each breath as a record, each silence as a song. Even now, under the feet of tourists who pose for photos beside ruins, the walls remember. They remember how the caldarium once steamed like an altar, how the oil was warmed in clay bowls, how the same woman sat in the same corner every week for years, never speaking, just watching. How the same girl tried to hide the bruise on her thigh, but eventually stopped trying. They remember the old woman with a crooked spine who always told stories about the countryside, and how she once saved a child from drowning with nothing but her own skirt. They remember how her hands shook when she handed the story to the others, as if it were something that might dissolve in air. The bathhouse was never built to be eternal. And yet, here it is, cracked, weathered, unroofed in places, but alive, quietly, immensely. Every city forgets its women first, their labor, their blood, their fire, their prayers. It carves emperors into stone, but lets the hands that buried their sons fade into myth. But the bathhouse did not forget. It kept their breath, their laughter, their defiance, their exhaustion. Even when the empire fell, and the weeds came, and the bricks buckled, the breath did not leave. Even when men debated what to do at the ruins museum, temple, market, the stone said nothing. It did not need to. Because sometimes on certain nights, when the moon hangs low and the air is too still, the walls seem to whisper, not words, not ghosts. Something softer, a breath, a hum, a warmth in the spine of the coldest wall. As if the building itself remembers every time a woman came here to be something more than useful, something more than beautiful, something more than afraid. And if you listen long enough, if you press your ear to the stone and let your breath slow, you may hear what they never wrote down. You may hear her. You may hear yourself. She had never seen so much stone curve like that. Not in the temple, not in the insula where she shared a room with two sisters, and a window that never quite closed. The bathhouse did not rise like other buildings. It breathed, and she felt that before she stepped inside. The way the outer arch stretched like an invitation not written for her, but not close to her either. It didn't call her in. It waited. That was worse, in a way. It made her choose. And so she did. The first step over the threshold was small in distance and immense in weight. Her tunic clung to the back of her knees with nervous sweat. Her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve with a need to do something, to prove she was allowed here. No one stopped her. It made her more afraid. Because if no one stopped her, then she had to belong. The floor cooled her soles instantly, mosaic tile, smooth and speaking without words. She looked down so she didn't have to look at the women in the corner, or the attendants with their indifferent faces, or the doorway that led deeper in. She stared at the design beneath her feet as if it might explain what to do next. It didn't, but it held her there anyway. A voice broke the air, not a question, a direction. The attendant didn't meet her eyes when she motioned toward the wall, but the gesture was not unkind. It was routine that helped. She followed. She didn't ask where to go. She didn't ask what would happen. She was too afraid of sounding young, but she felt it. In her breath. That tight little flutter that came with things she couldn't prepare for. The room where she undressed was warmer than she expected. Not from the fires, from the women. From the way they moved around each other with a quiet that felt older than speech. She couldn't stop her eyes. She tried, but they kept pulling toward breasts and hips and scars and bellies soft with years. So many bodies, and none of them flinched. She didn't know what to do with that. Her own hands trembled slightly when they untied the belt at her waist. She kept her eyes down as she let the fabric slip. She didn't fold it. She didn't know if she was supposed to. No one seemed to notice. She stood there for a second too long, naked, not from skin, but from knowing she couldn't hide now. Then she followed the others, because that was what her sister told her to do before she left this morning. Just follow them. The tepidarum was the first breath of warmth that didn't ask something in return. It enveloped her like a river that didn't care who you were, just that you let it touch you. Her shoulders dropped without permission. Her jaw loosened. The breath that had lived tight at the top of her ribs slid lower, deeper. She didn't expect that. She sat. She mimicked. She watched. The women were not quiet in the way priests were quiet. Their silence was not about reverence. It was about fullness. They didn't need to fill the space with sound, because they were already enough. And that terrified her, more than if they had laughed or pointed or turned away. They simply were, and they let her be too. When the oil came, she didn't know what to do with it. She copied the woman next to her. She smeared it along her arms, her thighs, her stomach, her hair. She didn't know why, but she liked the way it smelled, like something that had grown under the sun, not in a jar. She pressed her palms together, oily and awkward, and tried not to drop the bowl. The woman beside her gave her a cloth to wipe the excess. She didn't say a word, but she smiled, and the girl felt something in her chest uncoil. Then the heat came, the real heat, the caldorium. She hesitated at the threshold, just for a breath. Her foot hovered above the next step. The air rolled toward her in waves, damp, heavy, alive. It felt like walking into a mouth. And something in her remembered being in the womb, even if her mind had no name for it. She stepped in. It was darker here. The walls seemed to sweat. The women, too. But no one moved fast. No one barked instruction. Everything melted. She followed them to the benches, sat, waited, listened. The sound of dripping, the rise and fall of breath, the creak of muscle when a woman leaned forward to pour water on the stones. She didn't speak. She didn't know what to say, but she felt something crawling up her throat anyway. Not words, not yet. Just that heat. That unbearable, unnameable heat that reached into the corners of her she had forgotten she had. She thought of her mother. Just a flash. The way she braided her hair too tight and kissed her too fast and cried when she didn't think anyone saw. She thought of the boy who touched her under the fig tree. Of the day her sister bled out in her arms and no one said her name after. She thought of how much pretending she had already learned, and she wasn't even grown yet. She didn't cry, but her body did. The sweat rolled from her forehead like forgiveness. It ran down her chest like apology. It pooled in the curve of her spine like a story finally let go. And when the attendant came to scrub her skin, she did not flinch. She let the pumice do what it had done for hundreds of women before her. She let it peel away what she didn't know she was holding. After, when the water cooled and her skin steamed gently in the shifting light, she sat with her legs folded and her hands in her lap. She didn't move for a long time. No one asked her to. And then when her body whispered that it had had enough, she stood. The frigidarium was waiting. She had been warned about it. But no warning prepares you for what it feels like to lower yourself into clarity. She paused at the edge, dipped one foot. Her skin screamed and then surrendered. She went in, slowly, all the way. No gasps, no dramatics. Just a long, slow surrender to the knowing. The cold didn't bite. It revealed. She thought of nothing. And in that nothing, she heard everything. Every voice she'd buried. Every want she'd silenced. Every fear she wore like a necklace. They floated up, and she did not swat them away. She let them surface. Let them look her in the eye. Let them know she saw them. And then, when the cold had done its work, she rose. The linen wrap felt like a second skin. The cloth wasn't special, but the hands that handed it to her were. They didn't rush. They didn't linger. They just offered, and she took it. She entered the drawing room like a ghost returning to flesh. She sat. Someone offered her a comb. She took it. She didn't know the woman. That didn't matter. She let her hair be brushed. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't think about how she looked. She just felt. The pull, the release, the rhythm, the presence. She didn't speak. But when the brushing ended, she turned and said thank you. Not in words, in eyes. In the way her fingers reached out to touch the other woman's wrist. Just once. Light, real. And then she left. Dressed again. Hair damp. Soul rearranged. No one marked her departure. No one clapped. No one praised. But the walls knew. And the next time she came, she would walk differently. Because no woman enters the bathhouse twice with the same silence. And no girl leaves it still pretending she doesn't know what power feels like when it has quiet, and soft, and entirely her own. They didn't know it was her last time, but she did. She felt it before she rose that morning. Before her bones had a chance to creak themselves into rhythm. Before the birds stirred in the courtyard. Before the neighbor's child coughed through the cracked wall for the fourth night in a row. She felt it in her breath, not in its weakness, but in its stillness. A calm that didn't need explanation. A stillness that didn't signal ending, only arrival. She dressed without ceremony. The linen tunic was worn soft by years, the color long surrendered to the sun. She did not tie her sash tightly. She did not need the illusion of shape. Her shape had spoken for decades and had nothing left to prove. Her hair she left unbraided, the strands silvered and fragile like the edge of winter on a branch, pulled back loosely into a knot that might come undone by the time she reached the gate. She didn't fix it. She walked slowly, not because she couldn't hurry, because there was no reason to. The world would still turn whether she rushed or not, and for once, she let it turn without her chasing. The bathhouse was not far. It never had been. It was built into the map of her days long ago, when her hands were still busy, and her name was always on someone else's lips. Back then, she came to remember who she was beneath all the asking. Today, she came to give something back. The attendants saw her and did not speak. They never did. They only nodded, eyes lowered, but hearts aware. She was the one who always sat beneath the third arch in the tepidarium, the one who hummed that half-forgotten lullaby while rubbing oil into her knees, the one who once held a stranger's child while the mother wept in the calderam and forgot how to breathe. She did not need guiding. She moved through the chambers as one moves through rooms in their own home, not to inspect, not to admire, only to belong. The walls did not surprise her. The steam did not blind her. The silence did not demand anything. She had given all of herself to this place, in hours and sweat and memory. And now, it gave her everything back. In the apoditerium, her hands moved slowly, each layer removed like a story she had told too many times. Tunic, sash, shift. Her skin, marked with a long litany of time stretch, sag, scar-breathed freely. No one stared. No one ever had. This was not a place where age became invisible. This was a place where age became understood. The tepidarium held her like it always did, not like a guest. Like an echo, she sat on the same stone. Her bones knew the contour. The oil warmed in her hands with familiar slowness. She rubbed it into her legs, into her arms, into the wrists that had carried baskets and children and sorrow. She did not rush. A girl sat nearby, young, unsure, her fingers twitching as if deciding whether to speak. The old woman turned to her, not fully, just enough. Their eyes met. The girl whispered, "Is it always this quiet?" And the woman smiled, soft as ash, "Only when it's full." They said no more. In the caldarium, she did not sit in the center as she once had. She found the corner, the one where the steam curled gentler, where the wall behind her had a faint crack shaped like a crescent moon. She leaned her back against it and exhaled, not from effort, from knowing. The other women came and went. Some nodded. One offered her a basin of oil. Another handed her a cloth. She accepted them all with the grace of one who had taught others how to give without fear. No one asked her why she came alone. No one asked why her eyes lingered longer on the flicker of the flames. They knew better. She scrubbed her own feet, not because no one would do it, because today it was hers to do, her final blessing to herself. The heat rose into her knees, her spine, her fingers. Her body was heavy, but not tired. It was full, like a vessel carrying just enough to reach the shore. She did not weep, not like before. She had already poured every version of grief into these stones over the years. The miscarriages, the arguments, the long years of absence beside a man who never left but never really stayed. The burying of her sister. The day her own voice grew so hoarse from silence, she had to relearn it. She had grieved all of it here. Today was not for grief. Today was for witness. She stepped into the frigidarium without hesitation. The water did not shock. It welcomed. It kissed each limb like an old friend. She dipped beneath. Fully. Let the cold wrap her like a promise kept. When she surfaced, her face was still. Not numb, just clear. And in the drying room, she let her hair down completely. It fell like memory across her back, thinner now, but still there. Another woman, perhaps her age, perhaps younger, it was hard to tell anymore, came and sat behind her, said nothing, picked up the comb, and brushed, slow, with reverence. With no need to ask permission, the old woman closed her eyes. Each pull of the comb felt like the closing of a chapter. A thank you. A goodbye that didn't ache. Her scalp tingled, not from pain, but from tenderness. She let it happen without resistance. She let herself be held. When the brushing ended, she turned, and with fingers steadier than they had any right to be, she reached into her wrap. She pulled out a small object. A comb. Old, worn, olive wood, carved with a single line down the center. She had used it for decades. She placed it into the other woman's hand. No words. Only the weight of meaning passed palm to palm. Then she stood, wrapped herself, dressed again, and walked to the apoditerium one final time. But before she left, she placed something behind the second stone from the right beneath the niche, where the light always struck just before dusk. A ribbon, faded, frayed, red. From the first time she came, no one saw her place it there. But the walls noticed. And when she stepped through the threshold into the sun, the light did not blind her. It welcomed her like steam. She walked home slowly, but not to end anything, only to rest. Because some women do not leave history by dying. They leave it by choosing when to say, "This is enough," and letting silence carry the rest. There is a moment, just after the last heel has left the stone, when the bathhouse exhales. Not as a building, but as something older than architecture. The air does not cool immediately. The heat clings for a while, reluctant, unwilling to let the bodies go so easily. The steam lingers in corners, like whispers that refuse to settle into silence. The light changes, not dimmer, just lonelier. And in that shift, something else begins to speak. Not the voices of women. They have left wrapped in linen, stories pressed into the folds like the scent of myrrh in clay. They carry the warmth with them into streets, into kitchens, into rooms where no one asks them what it meant to sit naked with strangers and feel, for once, like they belong to themselves. But the bathhouse does not forget, not when they leave, not when the fires die, not even when the empire that built it forgets how to speak its own name. After the door closes, the bathhouse turns inward. It does not sleep, it remembers. Every step echoes differently, now no longer interrupted by movement, or laughter, or sighs. Each drop from the ceiling lands, like punctuation in a sentence too sacred to finish. The walls no longer need to be strong. They soften. They pulse with memory. A basin, half full, catches the last echo of heat. A comb, forgotten near the ledge, still carries a single hair. A footprint, moist against stone, dries slowly, as if resisting erasure. The towel draped imperfectly over the edge of the bench does not fall. It waits, as if expecting the hand that left it to return. And in that waiting, a different kind of life flickers. Because when women leave spaces like this, they don't always take everything with them. They leave behind the things they're not ready to name, the ache between the shoulders, the dream they've tucked under responsibility, the question that still burns even after the prayer is whispered. The bathhouse takes these offerings without demand, without judgment. It stores them in the stones. And at night, when the world turns its face away and the stars dare to peer through the high windows, the bathhouse becomes not a place, but a presence. It remembers the girl who came only once, walked in with defiance, left before the oil touched her skin, but who returned 3 years later with quieter eyes and a bruise she didn't hide. It remembers the woman who never spoke, but whose breath hitched every time her back was scrubbed. It remembers the laughter that followed the story of a midwife who had once mistaken a goat's bleat for labor, and how the laughter didn't stop until someone wept. It remembers the old woman who said, "This is the only place I have not been small." A bathhouse does not need permission to keep these things, and it keeps them well. Even centuries later, when the marble has crumbled and the statues lie faceless, when weeds crack the tiles and coins are no longer offered to the gods, but tossed to tour guides, the bathhouse breathes beneath the ruin. It still hums with a rhythm that cannot be photographed. It sings to no one and everyone. It waits not to be restored, but to be felt. The archaeologists come with brushes and gloves. They count artifacts. They label pottery. They reconstruct diagrams. They map the baths as if memory can be measured in centimeters. But they do not know that the most sacred thing ever left here was not carved. It was lived. They find the hypocaust system, marvel at the ingenuity. They trace the pipes and describe the engineering. But they do not kneel to the place in the wall where a girl once pressed her forehead for 47 breaths because her mother's voice had followed her there in a dream, and she didn't know how to make it stop. They photograph the mosaics, publish papers on the geometric balance, but they never feel the spot where a woman once lay curled in the silence of the frigidarium, water up to her chest, and whispered to herself, "This is the only place I have not lied." The steam is gone now, but not the heat. It lingers in the stone like an old promise. The benches still hold the grooves of shoulders and elbows and thighs that once rested without flinching. The scent of oil is long faded, but some evenings, when the air is just right, the breeze carries something floral through the broken windows and the walls stir. Not for attention, for memory. And if you stand very still, barefoot, eyes closed, just before dusk, you might feel it. Not warmth. Witness. Not ghost. Gratitude. The bathhouse remembers the women. But it also remembers the silence that was never allowed outside its doors. The conversations that were not shouted, but shared. The truths that didn't survive ink, but thrived in breath. The touch that was not lust, not duty, not demand, just comfort. No statues were built for them. No tablets etched their confessions. No emperors thanked them. But the stone knows. It knows the difference between a foot that treads lightly out of respect and one that stomps out of conquest. It knows the sound of a woman kneeling not to pray, but to rest. It knows the way water changes when it holds pain, and it still holds them. Not to trap, to honor. So when the tourists come, chattering through audio guides and pointing at nothing they understand, the bathhouse remains still. It does not explain itself. It does not correct their assumptions. It lets them pass. But for the ones who stop, who look longer, who place a hand on the wall without knowing why, sometimes the bathhouse speaks, not with words, with warmth. The faintest trace, a shimmer in the spine, a slowing of breath, a pause too long to be called coincidence. That is when you know. That is when you've touched what history refused to write down. That is when you've stepped into what still lives. And the bathhouse, in its infinite, silent fullness, will press itself into your memory, not as ruin, but as recognition. There comes a moment, if you stay long enough, where you stop watching and start being watched. Not in the way of spectacle or danger, but in the way old places begin to notice that you've stayed quiet, that you've lingered, that you've come not to conquer the story, but to hold it. And that's when the shift begins. Not in the stone, in you. You stop thinking about what they did. You start feeling what they felt. Not as characters, not as figures in a fresco lost to erosion, but as women who once sat exactly where your breath now hangs. And suddenly, the space between you and them thins until it's not space at all, just time folded gently over memory. That's when I stopped narrating. That's when I started listening. Not to the records, not to the inscriptions, to the steam still curled into the mortar, to the ghosts that never tried to be frightening, to the warmth that had no temperature, but still moved like breath along the back of my neck. I had come to the ruins like anyone else, camera tucked in bag, questions in mind, half expecting nothing and half hoping for a trace of something unspoken. I had read the placards. I had circled the broken pools. I had taken the photo where the sun hit just right. And then I stayed, longer than I meant to, past the families, past the couples, past the school group with their noise and gum wrappers and sunscreen shine. I waited. The guards didn't notice. Or maybe they did. Maybe the bathhouse asked them to forget me. I sat on a stone ledge, still warm from the day's sun, and I let myself stop trying. That's when I heard it. Not a sound. A shift. The way silence changed its pitch. The way the dust caught a shape that wasn't wind. The way I remembered things that weren't mine. A voice not spoken, but felt rose from the walls, from the cracked mosaic under my shoes, from the faint scent of minerals still embedded in the air. And I saw her, not in flesh, not in vision, but in truth. A woman, alone, kneeling, not in prayer. In rest, her hair loose, her fingers pressed against the floor, not to support herself, but to remember what solidness felt like. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Her presence wasn't for performance. It was simply there. And then came another, leaning against the arch, one hand tracing the crack where warmth once escaped, her eyes heavy but not tired, her feet bare, her lips parted as if mid-thought. She smelled of olive and something older than oil. She nodded not at me, but at time. They weren't showing themselves. They were remembering themselves. And in remembering, they let me feel it too. The weight of what it meant to be touched without question. The holiness of breath that doesn't have to rush. The miracle of a body being just a body, not a promise or a threat or a currency. The room around me shifted, not in form, in feeling. The walls no longer ruins, the air no longer empty. I was no longer a visitor. I was something else, a witness. No longer outside the story, but inside it, not telling it, carrying it. I felt her hand in mine, the girl who came for the first time, terrified of being seen and more terrified of being invisible. I felt her hair across my fingers, the elder who handed her comb to someone she would never see again. I felt her breath at my neck, the mother who sat alone because no one knew she had been pregnant, and no one ever would. They were all there, not performing, not haunting, just being. And in that quiet, in that long inhale of recognition, I knew I had been walking toward this place my whole life. Toward the moment I would stop asking history to show me its crowns and start asking it to show me its steam. Toward the breath that wasn't mine but lived inside me anyway. Toward the warmth that wasn't heat but memory. I had thought I was here to learn. I was here to remember, and not alone. Because now you're here too, and maybe you feel it. The way your spine softens as you listen. The way your chest rises differently now. The way your skin remembers things you never said aloud. Maybe this story was never about Rome. Maybe it was about you. The part of you that aches quietly behind your ribs. The part of you that doesn't need fixing, just witnessing. The part of you that has been waiting for a room where you don't have to smile. And maybe, just maybe, this bathhouse, this crumbled, sacred, invisible place is still open. Not in the city. In you. Maybe the walls are the moments you give yourself to rest. Maybe the steam is the breath you slow down enough to feel. Maybe the silence is the way you let others speak without interruption. And maybe the memory isn't in the stone anymore. Maybe it's in your hands. Because now you've heard it. Now you felt it. Now you know there was a place. No men allowed. But somehow you've made it in. Not to observe. To remember. And now the room is quieter than before. Not because no one is speaking, but because everything that needed to be said has found its place in your chest, in the hush behind your ribs, in the way your breath now knows how to pause without fear. You've been here long enough to stop performing. Long enough to understand that silence doesn't mean absence. It means trust. That's all this place ever asked of you. That you stay long enough to soften, long enough to listen, long enough to let the old warmth climb into your hands and remind you that history was never made by the loudest voices, but by those who sat in quiet rooms and exhaled their truth into the steam. You've seen her, haven't you? The woman who walked in holding too much. The girl who stared at the floor because she wasn't ready to be witnessed. The elder who moved like time itself had taken refuge in her joints. The stranger who brushed hair without asking, because that's what care looked like before it became a favor. They live in you now, not as characters, as memory. And memory, when held with reverence, does not fade, it becomes structure. You are a room now. You are a roofless sanctuary. You are walls soaked in stories no one else would keep. You are the breath that remains long after the fire has died. And maybe you're wondering, what does it mean to carry this? To hold something so ancient, so intimate, so forgotten by scroll and inscription, and bring it into the world outside your door? Maybe it means nothing dramatic. No monument. No proclamation. Maybe it means brushing your own hair more slowly. Maybe it means holding space when someone says, "I don't know why I'm crying." Maybe it means remembering that silence can be sacred, not awkward. Maybe it means leaving space in your own home corner, a pause, a ritual for the version of you that's too often asked to disappear. Maybe it means nothing at all except this, that the next time you're tired and the world tells you to push through it, you don't. You sit, you breathe, You wait for the steam to rise around you, even if only in your imagination. Because now you know what it feels like to be held without needing to perform. Now you know what it sounds like when a woman takes her time. Now you know what it smells like when truth steeps in oil and skin and salt. Now you know that not all sacred spaces have altars. Some have benches worn smooth by generations of women who were never named, but who left behind something more permanent than titles. They left behind rhythm. They left behind ritual. They left behind the memory of what it feels like to be human without explanation. You are a continuation of that. You are the breath after the brushstroke, the ripple after the basin is emptied, the echo of feet across mosaic that never asked to be clean, only real. And if this story ends, and it must, because all stories do, it doesn't close. It stays open, like the doorway of the bathhouse, arched and waiting, neither inviting nor refusing, simply there. And you're standing in it. You could turn away now, close the lid, leave the room. Call this a video, a story, a sleep aid, a thing someone once made, but part of you won't. Part of you will stay. Because something in your chest remembers the way her fingers dipped into warm oil before she knew what healing looked like. Because something in your spine remembers the way she sat in cold water and didn't flinch. Because something in your breath remembers the quiet of the drying room when a stranger combed her hair and asked for nothing in return. Because you, too, are a woman who has carried silence longer than anyone knows. Or you love a woman who has. Or you came from one. So ask yourself, what steam still lingers in your bones? What corners of your soul have never been scrubbed? What quiet space inside you is still waiting for someone to come sit beside it and say, I see you? Will you go back into the noise? Or will you carry the hush with you? Will you forget the softness the moment the screen dims? Or will you build your own bathhouse in the hours you gift yourself? Will you laugh too loudly one day at a story that makes you ache? Will you let someone else brush your hair not to fix it, but to witness it? Will you remember what it meant to walk out of that place, no longer new, but whole? This is the part where I would normally tell you to sleep well. But I won't, because you're not here for sleep anymore. You're here for something older than rest. You're here for remembering. And now you do.